Hello,
And welcome.
I'm Phil,
I'm Sophie.
and this is the Philosophy Podcast. So today we're kicking off something a bit different. It's a standalone deep dive, part of a new series we're calling Pop Culture and Philosophy.
Yeah, the idea is basically to look at articles that connect things like shows, movies, games, pop culture stuff to, well, philosophy.
Exactly, and this is the very first one in the series. And with the 27th season of South Park just launching, we thought, okay, perfect timing. Let's dive into the ethics of laughing at South Park.
It felt pretty relevant, didn't it?
Totally. So for this, we've looked at two main articles. The first one is It Okay to Laugh at South Park by Catherine Yu.
And the second is Blasphemous Humor in South Park by Kevin J. Murtagh.
Now, it's worth mentioning these articles were actually from 2007.
Yeah, a little while back.
But honestly, the philosophical points they make and that core question, is it okay to laugh? It feels just as relevant now as it did then. Maybe even more so.
Absolutely. The show hasn't exactly gotten less controversial.
Right. So as always, if you want to read these yourself, the sources and a link to the book are down in the description. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack the ideas in these articles.
Sounds good. South Park is definitely a challenging place to start, ethically speaking. It really makes you think.
It really does. And Catherine Yu jumps right in, doesn't she?
Yeah.
She makes us face this kind of uncomfortable truth that we laugh at stuff that, well, when you describe it out loud, sounds pretty awful.
Yeah, she uses that fat button pancake head episode as a prime example.
Oh, yeah. Where Cartman has the Jennifer Lopez hand puppet.
The Jennifer Lopez puppet, yeah, it sings about tacos and burritos, the whole stereotype thing.
In that, like, distorted accent, and then the whole Ben Affleck falling in love with Cartman's hand. It's just bizarre and, frankly, disturbing.
Definitely ticks a few ethically dubious boxes.
But as you point out, even hearing that description, a lot of us, well, you kind of have to suppress a grin, don't you?
That's the conflict right there. That involuntary chuckle versus the, oh, this is wrong feeling. That's the dilemma she wants to explore.
So how does she start to untangle that?
Well, she makes this really important distinction right away. Sort of two separate questions we need to ask about laughing. First, there's what she calls the aesthetic question. That's about when it's fitting to laugh. Is the thing actually funny? Does it have the, the features of humor?
Like objectively funny.
Sort of. Like if someone laughed hysterically at a really bad flat joke, you might think, okay, that's not fitting laughter. It's an aesthetic error, she calls it. Not immoral, just you didn't get the joke right, man.
Okay, so that's one question. What's the other?
The other is the ethical question. When is it morally wrong to laugh? This is where the morally awful part comes in.
Right. Like the episode titled, Child Abduction is Not Funny, You Dick. Laughing at actual child abduction is clearly wrong.
Exactly. Or, the classic South Park line, boys, you shouldn't laugh at Timmy, he's handicapped. That's an ethical judgment right there. It's saying the laughter itself is morally bad in that context.
So funny doesn't automatically mean morally okay. And not funny doesn't automatically mean morally bad, I guess.
Precisely. They're independent evaluations. Something can be technically funny, aesthetically speaking, but ethically problematic. That leads us to this philosophical stance called aesthetic moralism. What's that about?
Well, in its extreme form, aesthetic moralism basically says that if something like a piece of art or a show is immoral, it just cannot be aesthetically good. It can't be beautiful or funny or well-made.
Huh, really?
Yeah. A more moderate version says, okay, maybe it can be funny, but its moral flaws detract from its aesthetic value. Either way, it denies that you can evaluate the is it funny question independently from the is it moral question.
And you disagrees with that?
Strongly. She argues, look, South Park clearly is funny. People find it amusing. They relish it, as David Hume might say. The fact that it works aesthetically, that it is funny, even while being morally questionable, suggests aesthetic moralism is missing something.
So the funniness exists separately from the morality.
Exactly. She uses the example of that Nazi propaganda film, Triumph of the Will. Aesthetically, it's often considered a brilliant piece of filmmaking, technically masterful, but morally, it's horrific.
Right. You can see the skill without endorsing the message.
Precisely. And understanding the distinction is crucial for you, the listener, when thinking about South Park. It can be funny, the jokes can land, but that funniness doesn't automatically make it morally okay to laugh. The two are separate judgments.
Okay, that distinction is really helpful. So
Yes.
if the aesthetic and ethical are separate, how do we figure out the ethical part? Is laughing at South Park morally wrong? Philosophers sometimes use this idea of a moral saint. Like, what would a perfectly good person do?
Right, the thought experiment. And Susan Wolf offers two main types of moral saint. There's the loving saint, who only cares about other people's well-being.
Okay.
And then there's the rational saint, who might care about their own interests too, but always prioritizes their duties to others above all else. Both are fundamentally focused on others' happiness and welfare.
So the big question, would either of these saints laugh at South Park? Imagine them watching Terrence and Philip or Nurse Gollum.
Yeah, Nurse Gollum with the fetus attached to her head. It's pretty extreme.
Extremely extreme. So would they laugh?
Wolf's answer is almost certainly no.
Why not?
Because for Wolf, humor that's at someone else's expense causes emotional harm, even if slight. A saint's immediate reaction wouldn't be amusement. It would be focused on the victim. They'd feel sympathy, or they'd want to help, or at least they wouldn't find joy or ridicule in the situation. Nurse Gollum, Wolf would probably say, is just beyond the pale for any decent person, let alone a saint.
Even the fart jokes.
Even the fart jokes are likely unbecoming, according to Wolf's framework, because there's still that element of laughing at someone, which clashes with the saint's overwhelming compassion. So, yeah, Wolf saints are probably not South Park fans.
Okay, so that type of moral saint wouldn't laugh. But hang on, are there other ways to think about a morally ideal person? What about someone like Aristotle? His idea of virtue was different, wasn't it?
Very different. Aristotle's ideal person isn't just about self-sacrifice. They're courageous, generous, self-controlled, just, reflective, friendly, a well-rounded, flourishing individual.
So would that kind of person laugh at South Park?
Quite possibly, yes. Aristotle's view doesn't necessarily rule out enjoying humor, even wicked humor. He emphasized our rational capacities. An Aristotelian saint could likely understand and appreciate the cleverness, the rhetoric, the incongruity in South Park's humor, even when it stems from misfortune.
So they could find it funny.
They could find it funny. They might enjoy the show. But being Aristotelian, they'd also probably reflect on it, seek a deeper understanding of why it's funny and what its effects are. Maybe they'd even, listen to a deep dive like this one.
So we're left with a bit of a split decision. Wolf's saints probably wouldn't laugh. Aristotle's probably would, which doesn't definitively tell you, the listener, whether it's okay for you to laugh. We still need to dig into how amusement itself actually works psychologically.
Exactly. What's going on in our heads when we find this stuff funny?
Okay, so let's get into that psychology. You mentioned Ronald de Sousa earlier. He has an explanation, right? Not about what makes things funny, but about the mental process when we're amused.
That's right. And de Sousa makes a really strong claim here. He says that to be amused by something, it's not enough just to understand the assumptions and attitudes behind the joke.
So what else is needed?
You have to actually endorse them. You have to, on some level, agree with the underlying perspective.
Really? Endorse them?
That's his argument. He uses this very grim joke about a woman complaining about being gang raped, and the punchline is wishful thinking. De Sousa argues that to find that funny, you must endorse sexist attitudes, like the idea that women secretly desire assault.
That's a heavy claim.
It is. And it means, for him, that finding the joke funny actually marks you as sexist. The amusement itself becomes immoral because it requires adopting that nasty attitude.
And he extends this to other kinds of humor.
Yes, specifically to what he calls satanic humor. That's humor with malice, humor directed at someone meant to ridicule or hurt. Enjoying this kind of humor, according to de Sousa, is morally wrong because it inherently requires sharing those nasty attitudes.
Okay, now I see where this is going for South Park because, well, a lot of its humor feels chthonic, doesn't
It
it?
really does. Laughing at Kenny dying over and over. Cartman's pure selfishness, the way Butters or Pip get abused, the constant digs at different groups. If de Sousa's right, laughing at any of that means we're endorsing the malice behind it. It means laughing makes us horrid people. Even our Aristotelian saint couldn't laugh if it meant genuinely endorsing racism or intolerance or cruelty.
So are we back to square one? Are South Park fans just morally compromised? This is where Catherine Yu comes back in with a rebuttal.
Exactly. Yu pushes back hard against de Sousa here. She agrees that just understanding the joke isn't enough for amusement. There has to be something more.
But not endorsement.
But not endorsement. Yu argues that you don't need to genuinely endorse these pernicious attitudes. You only need to imaginatively adopt them for a moment.
Imaginatively adopt. What does that mean?
Think back to the Jennifer Lopez puppet.
Yeah.
He says it's funny not because you actually believe racist stereotypes about Latinas being fast-talking, taco-obsessed colas.
Right.
It's funny because In your imagination, just for the duration of the joke, you adopt that perspective. You playfully entertain that stereotypical view to see the incongruity and get the humor.
Oh, okay. So it's like trying on a viewpoint temporarily.
Exactly. And crucially, you argues this imaginative adoption doesn't mark you as racist or sexist or whatever the attitude is. It's like, imagining your Superman doesn't make you think you can actually fly.
Good analogy.
It's a fleeting make-believe adoption, and that's enough to trigger the amusement without requiring genuine belief or endorsement.
That makes a huge difference then. If you is right.
Then a moral saint could potentially laugh at South Park and still be a saint. They could engage in this imaginative adoption without actually taking on the nasty attitudes. Even wolf saints who seemed ruled out before might be able to laugh under this model.
So imagination saves the day.
Sort of. But you add a really important caveat. Amusement does become immoral if you do genuinely endorse the malicious attitudes.
Yeah.
If your laughter comes from real scorn or hatred.
Then it's different.
Then it's different. That's what one psychologist called the snarl of the brute. It's not playful imagination anymore. It's genuine malice finding an outlet. But for most viewers, you suggests, a bit of imaginative play is usually what's going on. It allows you to get the joke without compromising your morals.
Okay, so that helps with the general ethics. But what about really specific, sensitive areas? Let's shift to Kevin Murtagh's article, which focuses squarely on blasphemous humor in South Park.
Right, Murtagh zooms in on one of the show's most controversial aspects. He starts with the Bloody Mary episode.
Oh boy, that one.
Yeah. The statue of the Virgin Mary apparently bleeding, first from the rear, then clarified as her vagina,
Yeah.
spraying blood on church officials. The Pope declaring that a woman bleeding from her vagina is hardly a miracle.
It was a lot.
It was definitely pushing boundaries. Murtagh says his own reaction was like, okay, that's probably over the line, but he still found it funny. And that tension, that feeling of laughing while sensing a moral transgression, is what he wants to analyze.
And his tool for analysis is utilitarianism.
Exactly. The classic theory, associated with John Stuart Mill, that the right action is the one that produces the greatest overall balance of happiness over unhappiness, considering everyone affected.
So apply that to blasphemy. First, what exactly is blasphemy in this context?
Murtagh defines it pretty clearly. It's showing irreverence or disrespect for something considered sacred. So, disrespecting God, or holy figures like Mary or the Pope.
Like the mole's names for God in the movie?
Perfect example. Calling God those names is textbook blasphemy.
But it's important to separate that from just, say, making jokes based on religious stereotypes.
Yes, that's a key distinction Murtagh makes. Joking about Kyle's dad being cheap because he's Jewish plays on a stereotype, which might be offensive or problematic in its own right.
But it's not blasphemy per se.
Right, because it's not directly disrespecting something held sacred within the religion, like God or a prophet or a core doctrine. So blasphemous humor, specifically, is when a show or joke intends to be amusing by portraying something sacred disrespectfully.
And South Park certainly does that. Okay, so from a utilitarian view, we need to weigh the consequences. Let's start with the negative ones.
The most obvious negative consequence is direct unhappiness causing offense.
Like Christians being offended by the Bloody Mary episode?
Exactly. Or Muslims being offended by the potential depiction of Muhammad in the Cartoon Wars episode. Offending millions of people intensifies the negative consequence, the unhappiness caused.
Are there indirect negative consequences too?
Murtagh suggests there might be. Drawing on work by Robin Tapley, he raises the possibility of desensitization. The idea is that constant exposure to humor that disrespects religion could make people, over time, less tolerant or sensitive towards religious groups and their beliefs.
Kind of like the debated effects of media violence.
Kind of analogous, yet. If people become desensitized, it could lead to more ridicule, social friction, conflict, and ultimately more unhappiness in society.
Okay, so offense and potential desensitization on the negative side. What about the positive consequences of blasphemous humor in South Park?
Well, first, the direct positive.
Yeah.
Lots of people find it funny. It brings entertainment, amusement, pleasure that's happiness, plain and simple.
Fair enough. Any indirect positive?
Yes, and this is central to Murtagh's argument. He points out that South Park, even in those blasphemous moments, often has a deeper message or encourages reflection on important issues.
Like the Bloody Mary episode again.
Exactly. Underneath the shock value, there was a pretty clear message about alcoholism, self-reliance, and the dangers of looking for easy miracle cures instead of taking personal responsibility through things like AA. Randy gets better through willpower, not the bleeding statue.
And the argument is that the blasphemy is actually needed to deliver that message effectively.
That's the idea. Murtagh talks about the sledgehammer effect, borrowing that line from the movie Seven. Sometimes you need to shock people, grab them by the collar, to make them pay attention and actually think about the issue.
So the controversy sparks dialogue.
Right, and that kind of open discussion and critical thinking, especially about sensitive topics like religion and social values, is seen as a major positive from a million utilitarian perspective. It challenges dogma, promotes understanding, and ultimately contributes to greater societal happiness and progress.
Okay, so we have offense and potential desensitization versus amusement, reflection, and social discourse. How do we weigh these up?
That's the tricky part of utilitarianism, right? Measuring happiness isn't exactly straightforward. You have to rely on educated guesses and general observations.
So what's Murtagh's conclusion? Does the blasphemy create more happiness or unhappiness overall?
Murtagh concludes that, on balance, South Park, including blasphemous humor, likely brings about a greater balance of happiness over unhappiness.
How does he justify that?
Well, he suggests a few things. First, the people most likely to be deeply offended probably aren't watching the show anyway. Second, the outrage expressed by certain interest groups might not accurately reflect widespread, intense suffering among millions.
Okay. What about the desensitization risk?
He's a bit skeptical about how extensive that effect really is, especially because South Park itself often provides counter-messages. It portrays intolerant characters like Uncle Jimbo as idiots, and it has episodes like Super Best Friends that explicitly promote religious tolerance.
So the show kind of balances itself out.
To some extent, yeah. And ultimately, he argues, the blasphemy serves a purpose. It draws attention to a show that is often genuinely funny, smart, tackles important issues, and explicitly encourages debate and critical thought, all things that contribute significantly to overall happiness.
But he adds a condition, right? It's not a free pass for all blasphemy.
Absolutely crucial point. Murtagh's final point is that blasphemous humor is only morally justifiable if it's a key part of a larger work that has significant social value, where the positives genuinely outweigh the negatives.
So just being offensive for the sake of it or purely for profit?
That, he argues, is morally wrong from a utilitarian perspective. The blasphemy has to serve a valuable purpose that generates enough positive consequences to offset the inevitable negative ones. Which brings it back to you, the listener. When you encounter controversial humor like this, how do you perform that balancing act? How do you weigh the offense caused against the potential for insight, commentary, or just sheer entertainment? It's a personal calculation, informed by these kinds of frameworks.
Thank you for listening to the Philosophy Podcast.